yeah, hi everybody, I'm Kristen, and as Ron said, I represent Anthesis Group. And I just wanted to share, I really appreciate that update by Barbara on the EPA grants. Previous to joining Anthesis, I worked in city government for over a decade, both in the office of a councilman and in the Department of Public Works. So definitely understand the impact that this federal funding can provide for local communities. So there's a lot of potential there. And hopefully today I'll be talking about implementation of recycling programs, and hopefully that will all help you as you think about how to implement programs that you might be receiving from federal funds. And just a note as well that when I worked with the city of Baltimore, had the opportunity to work on food waste reduction in partnership with NRDC. And we got to learn best practices from other cities, including Atlanta. So I know there's a lot of good work happening in the region around food waste, but of course there is much to be done. So I'll be talking today about different approaches and solutions to food waste, but also, if you don't work directly in food waste, the approaches I'm sharing can really be applicable to many waste streams. So just thinking about these approaches and, the real benefits of partnership can be applied to many different waste streams to think about. So I'll be providing just some background information, and then, the interesting part will be going into a case study. So just briefly about Anthesis, we are totally dedicated to sustainability work. We work globally in about 40 countries now, and we serve thousands of clients. And we're really dedicated to shaping a more productive and resilient world, and really embedding models of change and sustainable performance. Actually, our leadership team just released a book called The Adventures of Sustainable Performance. So if you're interested in learning more about our approach to this, you can always check out that book. And in general, our clients, many of our clients are large multinational brands, but we also can support cities, nonprofit organizations, coalitions, and trade groups. So some of our bigger clients do include Amazon, Salesforce, Target, Diageo. I recently worked on a project with Closed Loop Partners around policies around waste reduction. So really supporting any clients that are looking to make a change and improve the sustainability of their operations. So I, of course, will be talking about, resource recovery and waste prevention. I sit within the sustainable products and services line, but we work really closely with all our other services. We do a lot around strategy and governance and thinking about things like setting sustainability goals and doing materiality assessments, all the way through implementation. We also do quite a bit of work around thinking about science-based targets and carbon footprinting, and helping our clients identify, how to really reduce their carbon footprints, and also be more responsible with their sourcing, which also relates to what I'll be discussing today. So if you are interested in learning more about any of these areas, feel free to visit our website or reach out to me directly. So food waste. I think this is an especially important topic because of just the scale of the problem. About 40% of all food that is created in the US is actually wasted each year, which is really a crazy amount, especially when you think about how many people are actually food insecure. And if you think about how much just water and energy and time goes into, creating this food that's then going to waste. So it's an urgent issue. As many of you probably know, thinking about US municipal landfills, food waste is the most prominent waste type making up those landfills, about 24%. So it's definitely a big problem. So I'll be focusing on this area, but again, these approaches can be applied to many different areas of waste. And I think it's kind of like these 3 steps at a very high level are what we need to think about. So first, just understanding, how much waste is there? What are the quantities? What are the sources? Why is it occurring? That's the first step, is to just understand what the problem is and really have a good baseline there. And then second is developing solutions. So what can we actually do to minimize that waste from occurring? And if there's waste that, we can't really avoid, how can we find better uses for it? And number 3 is actually, just implementing the solution. So if it is setting up a new compost program or making operational changes to prevent the waste, all the steps that are needed to do those actions. So the planning and the education and the outreach. So as I mentioned, preventing food waste is definitely the first step here, and implementing food loss reduction can really result in significant benefits. So I just wanted to share this. This is a case study, just a quick snapshot of some work we did through the Walmart Foundation. This was completed earlier this year, and it really highlights the savings that can occur. So this chart just shows work that was achieved at 20 different food manufacturing facilities. So through this work, we did a walkthrough of the site to identify, how we could reduce the waste from occurring. And some of these solutions were fairly straightforward. Things like, maybe a bin was overflowing too quickly and employees needed to empty it quicker so that, food wasn't falling onto the floor. Other solutions were a little more complicated. With this gelato company, we actually identified that gelato was freezing in the pipes. So efforts needed to be made to put more air into the pipes to prevent that from occurring. There was also an issue with gelato getting stuck in a holding tank and the holding tank not being cleaned out thoroughly. So, that gelato was going to waste. So just identifying, how could that holding tank be better designed to kind of slope and be easier to clean out. And that resulted in quite a bit of saving, monetary and food savings of the material. So just really, doing the walkthrough was able to identify on average over $200,000 of annual savings at each site. And the overall impact here is really significant. All the savings that were identified equaled about 6.7 million meals per year that could be saved. So if you think about it, this was only 20 sites. If this work were done at every food facility, at every restaurant and commercial kitchen, at every food retail space, think of all the food waste that could be avoided. So this is really important and can really result in significant cost savings and environmental impact savings. So we know that, not all food waste can be avoided. Some of it are just kind of byproducts of the process. A common example of this is maybe spent grain from brewing. So that spent grain is kind of a byproduct. It's not really meant for human consumption directly, but it still has nutritional value. It still has potential to go into other ingredients. So there are examples of that spent grain then being used to make, energy bars or bread or crackers. So there's a lot of examples of that where you can actually take that byproduct and make it into a new ingredient or a new product. So that's what we'll really be focusing on here. And it's also important to think about the definition of upcycling because we don't want to be upcycling something that could be prevented. So if it's a matter of, fixing, in the gelato example, if we can just fix the situation so that something's not going to waste rather than somehow upcycling it, that's really the goal. So the second bullet point here is a definition from the Upcycled Food Association. And it's really using those ingredients that would not have gone to human consumption and they're procured using those verifiable supply chains and they have a positive impact on the environment. So that's the goal here. And this upcycling has so many benefits. If you think about it is, of course, reducing waste, but if you also think about supplying the material to another producer, that can be replacing a new type of material. So if that, bread manufacturer is sourcing upcycled spent grain, that helps their own supply chain. And we've been seeing more movement lately, kind of away from buying carbon credits and more into insetting or looking for opportunities within your own supply chain to reduce carbon impacts and to be more sustainable. So there's a lot of opportunity here when thinking about supply chains to have a more positive impact. Also noting that upcycling really gets to the idea of the circular economy. The second for as long as possible at their best and highest value. So if you can't keep it in use as its kind of original product, it is keeping it in use as high of a value as you can. So that's the goal here, is really looking for opportunities for these, kind of byproducts that can be used into other products. So, we know, as I just talked about, there's so many benefits to upcycling. So you might be wondering, why isn't this happening more? Why don't I see more of this? And there have been historic challenges with it. It's one thing to just identify that we have a byproduct and, it could be turned into another type of ingredient, but there's a lot of steps in between that can be challenging. Especially if if your skill set is brewing beer and you have all this spent grain and you want to do something with it, but you don't have the skill set to get it to where it needs to go, that often presents barriers. So these are just some examples of, the things that are important to think about with upcycling. There can be operational challenges. It's important to really be able to quantify how much byproduct you have and what's its nutritional value, and how can you recapture it to actually be further processed. Because if it's currently just going to composting or going to waste, it might not be handled in the same way with the same health standards as you would need it to be if it's going for food. The nutrition and economics are also very important to understand. What are the logistical challenges? What's the nutritional value of that byproduct, so that you can best identify the end uses. And then, of course, going to market, consumer awareness is really important here. Currently, there often is a lack of consumer awareness. The good news is studies have shown that consumers are willing to buy upcycled, especially once they understand what it is. So even if it's just some short messaging about, what is upcycling, why is it important? Once consumers understand that, they're more likely to want to buy that type of product. So these are kind of many steps to think about to get something from, just being that byproduct to actually becoming a new product or ingredient and going to market. So these, this can be challenging, but we do have solutions. So just quickly, again, here's kind of our approach to thinking through the analytics, the solution, and the implementation here. So the first step really is identifying all the partners and the value chains. Where can the material go and who along the supply chain can help it get there. And it's important to think about the geography. I think upcycling really is a regional approach because once you start talking about transporting materials long distances, it quickly doesn't make sense economically or environmentally. So upcycling really works best as a regional approach. So as you think about, your region where you are and all the food manufacturers, maybe in that region, how can they connect and how can that upcycling happen? So keeping things local. And then through the solution is really identifying those value chains. And then of course, the implementation of getting things into place. And the Upcycled Food Association actually has a certification. So it shows that yes, this product is upcycled and it went through the process. So that's an important step there, I think, to raise consumer confidence to have that certification. And it's helpful, for the manufacturers to kind of understand what steps they need to take to be safe and make sure they have a product that meets the standards. Okay, now we get into the really interesting part of the case study. So we did some work earlier this year and last year with BC Food and Beverage to establish a repurposed incubator. So I just want to introduce, what is this concept? So Anthesis has this idea that we've developed mostly working in Canada because the federal government and provincial governments have provided funding for supporting upcycling and supporting this type of work. So really hoping to do more of this work in the US and kind of raise the idea of it. And I know the opportunities there. So the idea here is to have a regional hub that really brings together all the skill sets needed. So all those challenges I just talked about, we recognize that, one food processor might not have all the skills and resources needed. So what we can do with setting up this incubator is identifying all the local talent that can support getting that material from point A to point B. So it's kind of a circular process, as you can see in the graphic. And it's really not a one-off exercise here. The idea is to have this hub in place to identify all the key players and have them be able to communicate with each other on an ongoing basis. And that way you have kind of like a sustainable solution into the future. So everybody knows who to go to and who to talk to. So if they have a byproduct they're looking to do something with, they know, what resources are in place to support this. So through the repurposed incubator, we are looking for, the food and beverage partners that are actually producing the byproducts and supporting with distribution and the retail. We're looking for service providers and support organizations that can really support with that nutritional and economic analysis and support the commercialization. So those go-to market strategies and thinking about consumer preference and really figuring out the value proposition. So through this work, I'll just go ahead to the case study here. So we worked with BC Food and Beverage. They're located in British Columbia, hence the name, and they represent many food and beverage companies, all different types. So they were seeking to really establish this repurpose incubator in their region. So we worked with them to figure out a plan to reach out to their membership and to other, support organizations within the region to identify who can be part of this repurpose incubator and what do they each bring to the table. And the ultimate goal here was to identify value chains for food upcycling. So actually figuring out, what's the byproduct available, where can it go, and who can support it throughout the chain to get it to market. In addition, we created a policy paper to really make the case for upcycling and kind of lay out how the government can support several regional hubs for repurposed incubators. So we started with really just surveying members to understand their interest and their readiness to move forward on this. So the survey was sent out, I think, to over 100 different organizations. We got really good feedback. There's a lot of follow-up needed, but this really helped lay the groundwork for understanding, who was most interested and who was most ready in moving forward. And an important step here was also understanding, have they already done a food loss and waste assessment? Because again, we don't want to be upcycling waste that could have been avoided. So making sure that potential members understood what their waste footprint was and that they were avoiding any waste that could be avoided. And then of the byproduct, we really want to understand what's the quantity and what's the nutritional content. Because, it's also, you need enough quantity and you need it to be consistent, because if somebody is depending on that byproduct as an ingredient, they need to know what to expect. So these are some of the things we looked for in the survey. And then we kind of ranked the survey results and followed up with those that seemed like they had the most potential in a series of interviews. So in the interviews, we dug in a little more and really tried to understand what challenges and barriers were in place and what we would need to address to move forward with the opportunity. Just a note, the graphic here, soybeans are another very good potential for upcycling. There's byproduct throughout this process of okara and soy whey that have a lot of potential for other products. So another good example of upcycled ingredients. Okay, so the final results here, this is kind of the interesting part. I know this is rather small, but we've basically identified several value chains. So one of them is soy okara, where we identified, yes, this company has this byproduct. We know the quantities. We've identified an ingredient company that would source this okara, source the soy okara to make okara flour. This is how they would do it. We knew where that second ingredient company would be selling that flour. And we understood what support they would need along the way, that they would need some full market research and branding and education. We had identified service providers that could support with that market research and branding and education. And we looked at what challenges there could be. So for each of these value chains, kind of digging in step by step to what support would be needed and who the players would be along the process. Another interesting one here was Kiwi. There was a Kiwi packaging company where they had some misshapen or damaged kiwi, and then we identified another kind of snack company that made kiwi chips. So they were actually slicing and dehydrating the kiwis, so it didn't matter if they were damaged. So that was another interesting opportunity. So we identified all these value chains, and now the next step is making this operational and taking all the steps needed to get to market. But this is a really important piece of just understanding what's actually needed and planning out that process. So as I mentioned, upcycling really works best as a regional approach. So just thinking about, within your region, whether that's a metropolitan region or a county or, even within the state or a couple states nearby, how can, products get from one point to another, and who can support throughout that process? And some regions have, certain products they're maybe known for or ingredients they're known for. So there could be a lot of potential there to make connections. And then, as I mentioned, in addition to food and beverage byproducts, there could be other materials that this applies to. Lots of manufacturing and industrial types of byproducts that could go to better uses. So the goal here is really to keep good material from going to waste, and keeping it at a high use. So I think there's a lot of potential here, and again, thinking about the federal funding that's available, hopefully we can really see more momentum in this area and more resource recovery and less waste. That's it. Thank you. And here's my contact information if you have any follow-up questions.